while we're at that point in the hymnary, we've just said the creed. And I need to tell you something about Santa Claus. Because in 4 days, it's going to be the feast of the real Santa Claus, Nicholas of Myra. That was his actual name. Nicholas. Nick. Saint Nick, right? Santa Claus. It was about 1,700 years ago now, pretty close. There was a big meeting of all the head pastors of the church. Christianity wouldn't get you arrested anymore in the Roman Empire. So they finally said, hey, we need to have a meeting. Because you know what? There was a very, very popular pastor who was teaching that Jesus isn't really God. And you know what? Old Pastor Nicholas, he came to the meeting. He might have been the oldest guy there. And you know what? Pretty soon, I see all these kids looking at me. Pretty soon, this young, very popular, very impressive pastor, he comes up and he's telling Nicholas, oh, you're just being silly, thinking that Jesus is really God. And Nicholas is saying, oh, yes, he is. And you know what? They got into it. You know how it can happen with guys sometimes. You have an argument, and then you know what happened? That young pastor guy who was actually teaching that Jesus isn't really God, we aren't even going to say his name because it doesn't need to be remembered. He was wrong. But you know what old Nicholas did? He actually did something maybe that was a little wrong. You know what he did? Can you guess what he did? Boom! Punched him. Because he knew that knowing who Jesus really is so important. And he spent the rest, they met for months. As a matter of fact, he had to apologize the next day. He got kind of in hot water for that. But then he spent the rest of that meeting, almost all of it, trying to convince all the other pastors not to go along with that guy. And when it finally came down to it, everybody was kind of willing to say, well, Jesus is similar to the Father. And old St. Nicholas, he said, no, he's the same as the Father. And so when we just said the Nicene Creed, that was the meeting. That was the Council of Nicaea. We have a little bit of Santa Claus right there. Do you know that? In these words, that Jesus is begotten of his Father before all worlds, God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, and here's the big one, being of one substance with the Father. In other words, he's God. So when you hear that Jesus is one substance with the Father, you know who wrote that? Santa Claus, the real one. You know? And the stories people tell about flying reindeers and elves and stuff like that, well, okay. But the real Santa Claus was most concerned that you boys and girls, all of us boys and girls, right, would know who our Savior truly is. That's the real Santa Claus. Oh, and by the way, on Thursday evening, we're having our first Advent Vespers, and I think that's the 6th, isn't it? I think it is. And that is the Feast of St. Nicholas. So, hey kids, if you come for Vespers, make sure you wear your shoes. Because when you get to the door, we're going to have you take off your shoes. Because there's an old tradition that on the Feast of St. Nicholas, your shoes get something in them. Not something the dog left either, something good. Okay, our chief hymn is number 90, Savior of the Nations Come. Hymn number 90.